Well, we're not recording this or streaming this, are we? Huh?
If you don't want to stream it, we can ask her not to stream it.
Well, no, it's not about that. I just wondered if we had to.
Here.
We can leave the two mics here.
And then give them one?
We still need one to float.
Yeah.
Do we need to tighten that little?
I
we
have
get
tried,
someone to
I mean,
be
if you have
the
two dimes, that's what we need, but I can't.
Two dimes?
Dimes. And this
Hey, you
is not a
guys,
drug
why
reference.
don't you come on?
I know I've got two dimes. At least I used to. There we go.
Oh my gosh.
Is it going?
Yeah, we're in a little bit.
Yeah, you got a little bit there. Hello, everyone. So the purpose of this is a little bit kind of summary, but it's really an opportunity to hear if there are other specific issues, things that you feel this association should be paying attention to regarding the big picture of what we're doing. Now, we learned through all of the different talks that we've had of a lot of different perspectives, a lot of issues within the business, a number of different perspectives on how people do what they do in this business. And we're not trying to be prescriptive in any manner that way, but we are trying to figure out, in terms of the growth of the association and its value, what are the things that you feel would be most valuable for us to be pursuing. That doesn't mean there's a guarantee that every one of them is going to get pursued, but because until we build the organization, have enough people to be able to manage all the things, the list we have already is pretty substantial and frankly exciting. And because it is a volunteer organization, and so much of the membership is quite busy doing the work that we do, this idea of trying to gather as much information, gather as many initiatives as possible, and then sharing that across the committee work that we have for the association. That's really the goal that we're looking at. So, I'm just going to go through some of the things, just to remind you all of where we've been. So, the identity of sound designers was the very first thing that we talked about. The state of the art. The idea of some of the challenges that we have in terms, again, of the business, but the different profiles and the manner in which we work. The future of sound reinforcement, which D&B was good enough to give us a bit of a viewport into some localization systems. The celebration of some of our artists, with having John Leonard here, and having the situation where we're not only doing the work of exploring everything that we need to know and do, but also to celebrate the achievements of people who have been doing this for a good while. The work practices, the composition, that was a very interesting and that very provocative talk as well. There's a lot of things that came out of that, as well as this idea of building a sound team and then collaboration on a musical. I mean, all of these things were wildly varied in both ideas, content, and hopefully they pique your imagination a little bit with respect to the manner in which you work and the manner in which we can work. So this whole idea of this additional roundtable was really to get more feedback from you all based on anything that you heard over the 2 days or things that you feel would be really valuable for us to be pursuing as an organization to better our industry. Any feedback, questions, issues?
So something that didn't happen, that we didn't talk about, something that we didn't talk about in the associates panel, and I will be the first to admit that this is like a sort of a very niche thing, and so I don't want to take up too much time with it, but just to put it as somebody we might think about, one thing that a lot of associate designers on Broadway are facing right now is that we are not making our 829 pension credits despite the fact that we are working on Broadway because we're having to split our contracts between two different unions. And this is, I've started a dialogue offline with several people, and we've talked about this, and we've talked about, well, do we go to 829 about this? Do we go to IATSE about this? And everybody said, well, we kind of got a thing going right now where our health insurance is working. Let's not shake the boat. And I think that TSDCA might be a place for those of us who are encountering those things to sort of talk about this and come up with a plan for it, because it's not cut and dried. I don't think there's a cut and dry answer to what the solution is, but it's a dialogue that I think those of us who it applies to should be having in some sort of a venue.
Are you going to be going to the meeting on Tuesday night at the 829 office?
I am. I think I'm still down, and I'm in Baltimore. Like tomorrow night.
Yeah, tomorrow night there's going to be a meeting about the negotiation with the Broadway League.
I'm in Baltimore tomorrow.
Is there anybody that can represent what you're talking about? Or
Let me ping a couple people and see.
You know, that might be a really appropriate place to bring it up.
Yeah.
I mean, I've always found that Cecilia and Carl are, you know, they're very practical, but they never seem to get mad about jurisdiction or things like that. And you know, and I think that might be the first best approach.
Okay.
Especially if this is a pressing issue and you're not making enough money to pay your insurance, right?
No, I'm making my insurance. It's the longer term. It's the pension credits. Like I you know, at this point I've been working on Broadway for 6 or 7 years, and I'm not vested in 829, and I know a lot of people like Walter Charbach has been here in New York working on Broadway for over a decade, and he doesn't have a single pension credit either. There are a good handful of other people who this applies to. So.
Well, I don't know if actually it's something that would be discussed in the I mean, it's not something we would negotiate with the league necessarily. So maybe you're right. Maybe it's just something. Have you tried calling Carl or Cecilia about it?
The people I've talked to about it have said, well, you know, where does this fit in? Like, because either one of the unions that were covered under this could look at this and say, well, you shouldn't be doing that, even though it's the common practice. So we've been sort of nervous to bring it to either of the unions, just because we've been a little afraid of what their reaction might be, and so this seemed like a safe place to.
It is, but I'm not sure that any of us are really going to be able to answer that. Whereas,
yeah,
I really think.
Yeah.
Really? I don't want to do this. Oh, you can't hear a thing? All right, DPA. I think I would recommend, that's just my recommendation, that you call Carl about it,
Okay.
call Cecilia.
Okay.
And
Great.
see what happens. I don't think they'll penalize you in any way.
Great. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
So this was something that was brought up earlier. I think John brought it up, and I would really love it if, as an organization, we pursued it. It would be a long-standing goal for us to get, and that is the working with the rights, the music rights, to make it easier for us to be able to get rights for music. Even one of the things I am a hair concerned about, that's probably too strong of a term, is I want to just make sure that we don't just think of New York and that we don't just think of regional theater, that we also consider like smaller venues across the country, right? And I think this is something that would affect all of us, no matter where we are in the country or what size venue you're at. And it's something that would be really useful.
You're talking about extant music, not music that you're writing for the show.
Correct, yeah.
Previously published.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I actually have, that's one of the things that on my list too. So we're sort of culling all of these ideas that have come through. The idea of the QLab programming and the double contract thing is actually on my list as well, relative to, because there's a choice there. I mean, there's an economic choice in terms of switching hats, in a sense, moving from the associate to the IA position in terms of being a programmer. And so those are balances that are, that's going to be interesting to see how that can be addressed. But nevertheless, that's on my list as well in terms of looking at that.
It's not driven by economics. It's driven by us being forced to fit into a mold that we don't seem to fit into, you know? Well, sound designers need those programmers, if you will, and the people that make the most sense to do the programming is
I still think that's a choice. I think there's other ways to do it in terms of if you have a stable of really good programmers that are already IA.
Oh, hey, I would love that.
Yeah, but that has to happen, and so those are some of the ideas in terms of choice. I know I was saying to people earlier that about 8 years ago, I first decided to get my face out of the screen and roaming around the room and giving my instructions for programming to another person, and to me that was so freeing that I really felt it was a huge advantage to me as an artist. So I like that idea, but now we have to get through some of the nitty-gritty of who's best responsible for doing that, and is the IA the best choice for that? It seems like it's the only choice at the moment.
Yeah, I have
Yeah.
no problem with
Yeah.
necessarily the representative organization, if it's the IA, if it's whoever, but you have to have that person that can actually
Right.
do it.
Exactly.
And most of the people that I currently know, and I believe most of the people that end up doing it, are more of the assistant type,
Exactly.
associate type variety.
Yeah.
Than
But
they-
that liability of splitting contract is problematic in a big way.
But isn't it too a way, and I know with the experience that we've had with Chris Cronin over the years, it's a way to keep Chris around for a couple of more weeks, right?
And that's why I sort of thought this was a good way, because of the 5 people I've spoken to about it, there are 7 different opinions. So it's not just a union issue. It's how we decide we want to move forward to this as a community, which is why it seemed a little more appropriate to be like a subsection of this group that this applies to, rather than a union only, like starting with 829 or starting with IATSE. You know, first off, coming up with a consolidated plan that we all agree on, and then moving forward.
You're right.
Just so I understand, is this a benefits question exclusively, or is this a workflow question?
It's actually both. It's a workflow in terms of who's most appropriate to do the programming for a particular show, and then there's the compounded problem of not being able to get vested so that you can actually get a pension, which in the long game is a pretty substantial problem.
So I just feel that there's an easy first step that this association can offer, and that's a meeting on the GoTo platform, you know, so that, you know, you guys can schedule, we can send out to the members who's interested in this conversation. You can doodle it up and, you know, schedule a GoTo and, you know, start the conversation. And I feel like there's several things that have happened that the first step is that conversation, which doesn't cost any money. And then there's like creating, just like what Work Practices has done, the document that you were looking at with that Nick had worked on and that you two had, David and Dan had worked on, that's just about figuring out how to put words to this problem so that you could then, you know, approach people. But the first steps seem possible and easy to move forward on.
But
But just in terms of making sure that this issue gets focused with the right group of people, let me just be dense for a second. I feel like I'm hearing 2 different issues. One is associates on Broadway are in this weird structure where your benefits are getting split into 2 places, and it's a problem. And then at the same time, as a community of sound designers and composers, there isn't an industry standard around who programs the equipment, and I think there's a question about like whether that should be standardized or whether teams need to make their own workflow. But just as a point of reference, it's a non-issue in the lighting department. Yes. And is that something we want to try to replicate?
And in particular, that there are extant political rules that are different in different theatrical atmospheres that force us to make peculiar choices about programming that have not been considered. There is no official notion of a QLab programmer as a job position universally, whereas there is a universal notion of a lighting programmer, and the very small theaters don't have one, and the big ones do, but everyone agrees what a lighting programmer is, and that when we can afford it, we have them. So the question is, do we want that parity with that? And if so, how? And is that how the same at all levels?
I think, as Jane suggested, that's the beginning of this conversation, to try to get some kind of consensus about what would serve us best. So I think if we can arrange something like that, that would be great to get a number of people on that conversation and see if there is a consensus about how to move forward with that, and then a plan can actually be made.
Can I just interject for a moment?
Please.
We need to respect the fact that be aware of the fact that the IA is not going to give up that jurisdiction. And that if they have their druthers, any computer would be operated by an IA member. So my question is, as a fellow sound designer who also works as a house contract employee, I want the designer to be able to make adjustments to their Galileo, to their matrix system, to the things that they want to work on. And some designers really want to do their own QLab, especially if it's a program that they're transferring from a smaller theater to a big theater. They want to be able to have their own fingers in it because it's been their baby from day one. So I always want to try and indemnify them so that there's a programmer to help them do what they need to do, or that there's somebody taking up that slot who's going to be useful and not an extra body. Because what we don't want to have happen is, an extra person that then we're fighting to be able to let the designer programmer touch everything they want to touch, right? When the union is, hey, they don't need to touch, like lighting designers, they sit there and they tell the programmer what to put in, what values to put in. And we have a lot more touchy-feely elements than light 345 at 98%. There's a lot more subtlety going on. So you just have to be aware of that delicacy and try and figure out where the balance is going to be. Just if we go down that slippery slope, I don't want to see anybody lose their opportunity to make aesthetic changes, more than a KVM and a remote, So, well, it's a real concern, because how many computers do we have on tech tables now? How many, everything is a computer tied to it, so.
Question?
I've got a related thought. This is just going back to how unstandardized this is and reiterating what Jane said about it being a conversation for work practices. Is I'm thinking through the practicalities of having a programmer and just thinking that there are so many things in terms of how I like my file structures and how I like data on my show computer to be, as I iterate, things like that, that is just so unstandardized, and there really is no corollary in lighting or something, that I really think it goes back to us thinking about how sound designers work, and maybe there is, kind of as Jim suggested, room for individual designers to work in their own way, but I do really think it's a work practices question.
How's this work? Brad. Kind of turning left. In terms of our long-term or big picture strategic goals, if we bring a focus to the changes that we want to implement in our industry in terms of composer fees, assistant fees, classification, where we land with all that, is there a way, or should we find a way to focus that energy? Should we focus it on Broadway? Should we focus it off Broadway? Should we focus it regional? And work from one angle to the other so we're not spread over three very different living, breathing monsters?
I think this is something we should have a continuing conversation about. My feeling is that, we've intentionally tried to have a very big tent, and we want that tent to grow. And if we don't relate to all of our members in one way or another. If we just focus on Broadway, for instance, that would alienate quite a few of our members from what their needs are. And there's so much going on off Broadway right now that for us to ignore that, I think, would be kind of criminal. But many of us across the country, we're a nationwide organization, and Broadway and off-Broadway don't relate. And particularly as we reach out in this next effort, when we do the launch, I envision us having even more people that are outside of New York. So it's not for me to answer, but I think we're going to have to split our committees up and figure out ways that we can address as many things as possible.
Yeah, it's not a comment about ignoring one or the other.
Okay.
It's a comment about, okay, we have a set of principles that are important to us and things that we want to change universally in our industry. Is there a way to tackle that in a succession of, having a directive succession of how we approach that? Do we want to tackle these problems in the regionals, in the LORT first? Do we want to tackle these problems off Broadway first? So that we can stay focused on one thing, work up, always working towards covering our entire industry, but making sure that we're not spread so thin and trying to affect change that we're ineffectual in doing it.
I think I completely understand where you're getting at, and obviously because we are a volunteer organization, there's going to be a limit to the amount of energy that can be spread across all of the goals, strategic goals that we have. I think part of our most important mission right now is to collect the biggest picture of things that need to be attended to. I think then we have to decide amongst those what things float to the top, the things that we can attack or address that provide the greatest amount of equity across all of the disciplines that we have. It is never going to be perfectly even. That's understood, and as long as that we're clear and vocal with each other about those needs, then we will hopefully have to prioritize to some extent one thing or another. But I think until we have a comprehensive list, it's actually really difficult from my perspective at this moment to say, well, this is the first thing. But we're slowly gathering that. And I think if these committees continue to do what they're doing in terms of creating focus, putting together comprehensive lists of issues that want to be addressed, then these individual committees can have a lot of strength in terms of moving in a number of different directions simultaneously. And so that's the hope.
Yeah. I want to second what you're saying, because I think if we did go the sort of succession model, then I think things will get too hyper-specific unintentionally. And if we go for more of the macro model, like try to do the more sweeping things, like defining what sound design is, like, or how we define what sound design is, that can be applied to anywhere, I think it makes sense. And then as we progress, we can then make more niche decisions about specificity.
Can I steal the mic because I got it first? So the thing is that, though, people work on what they're interested in. You know, and this is, like, for example, using Alex as an example, that's a real-world issue that he has thought about and talked about, and he's, you know, and with other people, like, we're at a point we can give him the next step. So that affects, I don't know, 15 people. I don't know how many people that affects, but we have the ability to maybe help him go to the next step. And yes, that's micro, but we should just do that. You know, like, I think we shouldn't, you know, and also we should look and see what the priorities of all of us. I mean, people, as I said, people do what they're interested in. Who actually steps up and does X, Y, or Z? Okay, that's what really matters to them. You know, so we have to follow that too.
It is worth just saying, as far as I know, the QLab board programmer thing is mostly a situation on Broadway. I don't know of a single off-Broadway house where they do not allow the designer to do the programming. And the only regional theaters that I know of that do not allow the designers to do the programming are Milwaukee Repertory and the Goodman Theater. In Pittsburgh Public.
Well, it's a union place.
Yeah,
where,
that's just,
right?
that's
but
all it is.
That's reality. So if you're going to,
Right.
but that could probably change. I mean, it has changed at the Goodman more recently, et cetera, et cetera. But, I mean, it's a good issue. I mean, it's something to think about, something to talk
Sure,
about.
definitely.
As we go forward.
Other issues?
I would like to talk about diversity of members and targeting a wider diversity group. There's a lot of white men in this room over the past few days. So I think we need to start thinking about not only targeting all of our members and creating a bigger tent, but to also creating a tent that is welcoming for all races, all genders, international people who have come over to America. I mean, gender, I think there was at the maximum 8 women in this room all at once this whole time. And
I don't think anyone's going to be arguing with you about that.
but I think the membership committee.
Yeah.
A Sound Engineers for Young Women organization.
Yeah. I think we'll see something, let's hope, that if we do a good job of getting the word out as this tent becomes larger, that we will see more people come into this association from a wide variety of backgrounds. Now, we don't know what that's going to be. And maybe, what we're seeing representative here is going to, unfortunately, amplify at the same proportion. We really don't know what that is. What I think you're saying is that maybe we also need to think about targeting.
Yes, targeting.
As opposed to just opening the tent and say, here's the door, it's open, come on in. And that would then, is that outreach? Is that?
I think it goes back to early education. We'll talk about this some tonight. Ken will talk about this. We need to, we're all in the business. We all see who's working. We know who's out there, and we want other people to join us. We're going to have to go into high schools. We're going to have to go early, get them young and get women involved when they're young, because they just don't naturally go there.
And we also, I think we have to start creating programs where people are okay to talk about what they've gone through, because not only are we just a white male community of sound designers, theater is also very much like that as well. So.
Well, actually, just to echo that, and I think being a little bit even more proactive, and that's only going to take a few years, but like bringing up Sound Girls as an example, perhaps getting involved as an association with a sponsoring or volunteering at their events, or sort of like, so going to high schools, but like, I just imagine like a camp, like organizing some sort of an opportunity as an association to, and that's a 5-year, 10-year long investment, but I think it's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah, but I think everybody in this room is committed to the long haul on this, and that's a great idea and something we should work towards.
But I just want to say, because, I recently have been on several panels about this, and I just like to say I'm a sound designer. I'm aware that I'm a woman, but I am a sound designer. So as that tent gets bigger, just be careful about that conversation. So I sort of, I actually opposed the diversity panel on this thing. What I felt was strong was to show strong women. We saw Anna Lee, we saw Toy, we have Ian in the room. We had Emma and Beth. So we're aware that we're women, but we're sound designers. So just, it's more that that we want the same opportunity. But it doesn't have really anything to do, and I have to tell you, not any different.
I don't want the term diversity in this context to mean women or black. It is a much bigger picture, and I think that's one of the things that we have to be sensitive about, because there are these, there's this baggage attached to the word diversity now, depending on what business you're in or what you're doing, that changes the complexion of what that actual meaning is. And I think we have to think about it in terms of the three terms that are going around in the corporate world right now are equity, diversity, and inclusion. Those three. And that opens up a lot of doors in terms of incorporating people into this. And I would love to keep that in the foreground of this idea and not think about, well, we're just trying to get women, or we're just trying to get this, or just trying to get that. And where the targeting comes in, I think, isn't necessarily narrow, but it could be. And those are things that we'd have to determine as we move forward. What kind of invitation will yield us a truly inclusive group? And to be determined. Ian, you had a...
Hi. I'm also really interested in having diversity to mean all levels as well as all geographic. I call it offity, off. Way the hell downtown in tiny little places and out in Queens and all of these tiny places where maybe, yes, the Broadway associates not getting their pension is not the biggest thing on our brains, but the trickle down of what we're concerned about and up here on the Broadway, off-Broadway, regional kind of level, trickling down there, I think is really important on all levels.
I work primarily in the regional theater world outside of New York, which is why I don't know many of your faces. But I just, picking up on this trickle down, and it's been referenced earlier, I'm curious for the group, like, my experience in the regional theater world is that producers, production managers aren't much concerned with what happens on Broadway and off-Broadway and using those as models. Rather, a lot of the lower theaters have the perspective that what they have done historically works, and they know that what Broadway does is vastly different, but they don't feel like there's any incentive to change from what they can, from the ways that they can already take advantage of us, to be quite frank. So I'm just, as we think about strategizing, just curious if people have very different feelings about this trickle down, and it might be different in other New York markets, but.
Yeah, I'm going.
Just quickly, I want to say that it's important in all of this is that I just want to make sure that we create the safe space so that we can talk about sound design and composition, so that anybody, no matter what background or where they work, can all feel like they can come here. I don't want the meetings to always center around Broadway or always center around lower theaters or off Broadway.
I think there is a strong trickle down that can occur and does occur. I mean, I do live in New York and a part of the off-Broadway, Broadway world, but when I go to a regional theater, and I'm always willing to take on their approach to the world until it is problematic. And then I revert back to, look, this is the way we have come to resolve it in a place where we do a very large amount of work. And I have no problem with your resolution as long as it works for me, but when it doesn't, then I think it the people in this room can help change the mindsets of those places. And I think that we can do that in important, interesting ways and solving. I mean, this is a really technical kind of issue between pretty much two unions is the problem on Broadway for a programmer / associate kind of position or whatever. But I think that has strong effect in the off-Broadway world pretty immediately here in New York. It tends to be much the same group of people. You know, Alex programs the exact same stuff on Broadway that he does downtown. And I think that those models then get carried down all the way farther downtown, if you will, and get carried out to the regionals at some point. If it's for no other reason than people coming from New York to work into the regional environment.
I was just going to throw two thoughts in. One, my friend Melanie Chen, who is up for the early career representative. Go, Melanie. Feel the Melanie burn. And none of you know her, I don't think. But anyway, but you know, to your point, she represents, to some extent, even a lower echelon, because she's like the off Broadway of San Diego. She does things in as far away places as Carlsbad. Thank you very much. But seriously, she's a recent MFA grad out of UCSD, and some of the early career things she's running into, she doesn't have a neighborhood like you guys do, where there's a lot of really young energy. I hope that doesn't sound condescending, because I don't mean it to be, but because she's kind of alone in a car driving up and down the I-5, grabbing little theater gigs, and in theaters that have, I actually just did one with her where there's a couple of wires and a couple of speakers, and maybe they work on Thursday, and which is interesting. So I think those problems are very much part of this organization, because that's why she's interested. The other thing I was going to say, yes, there is. But I'll take a break, because it's a word from our sponsor. No, the other thing I was going to say that maybe in its own way addresses diversity, which is an interesting word, I agree. But my composition teacher and some of his colleagues said that the most important musical instrument invented in the sort of towards the end of the 20th century was the tape recorder. And I would say that the most interesting and musical instrument to have been essentially invented, so to speak, over the past 20 years are those things. Which I would venture to say everybody in here has one of those things, and it doesn't matter. Yeah, everybody, yeah, look at that. Isn't that something? And now the good news is that you can create very, very powerful things in a matter of a second with those things. And many people do who don't work in theater, They just create their own interesting sound world, sound artist stuff, sound world that goes to film, sound world that goes to image, sound world that goes to that. And they are of all kinds of diversities, because anybody with a little bit of gumption and a tiny bit of support can get one of those things. And they're only getting more and more powerful, even if I'm a 17-inch man myself. Thank you very much. But and I don't mean to be cute, but they are getting smaller, which is rough for those of us who are getting blind. So but anyway, so now the bad news of that is that, as they say in film, these things, any idiot can make interesting music with these things. I mean, and that's true.
It isn't true. I've heard it. It's not.
But I know what you're saying.
Yes, you do. No, I mean, it's so accessible that you can create something interesting. Oh, look, I'll just take this thing and reverse it and put a beat. Oh, really cool. Let's put it in a film. Oh, great. There it is. I did it. And the director does that, and no composer gets hired, and life goes on. These things have their downfall, but it is a way to say all of us have a means of production easily accessible. That Lord knows I didn't have when I was in my 20s, and it had nothing like that. So
I don't like those directors, Michael. I direct sometimes too, so I've become torn sometimes. But to your, I don't know who you are. I'm Dan. Hey, I'm Brad. To your comment earlier, I actually noticed the opposite in the regionals that I'm working in and in the LORT theaters, is that those organizations are now getting a tremendous amount of financial capital and artistic capital for developing new work and sending it away from their theater here into town, which brings up a whole nother issue with them, where they are not necessarily embracing a New York style model, in that when we do a show there, we've been a creator of that show or own work that's now attached to that show, and then need to when it continues, if it doesn't continue on with us, I think that's an issue that we could put down the list somewhere. Maybe it's partially a union issue, but the union doesn't seem to have much footing with it. But being able to stay with a piece that you've helped create is becoming a bigger deal with me every year.
I just wanted to echo a little bit what you said and sort of my own comment about some of the panels that we've seen. This question of, and I know that's a challenging word, but diversity, and talking about sort of the panels that we have, and figuring out diversity in both experience and sort of, but also workflow practices. So have somebody who exclusively works on one of those and have them talk about how, like, and really examine sort of an ever-widening sort of field of the definition of what's happening. And by that point, maybe it's my humble opinion, a little bit more show and tell, right? Like, I would have loved to have seen or get a little bit more specific details on the exact processes, maybe examples of work when we're talking about composition or even sound design for musicals. So it's not just, so it's because it falls into conversation as anecdotal. And I would be honored to see some of the experience and have it come from different perspectives. So.
Just to talk about diversity of location for a second. So by a show of hands, if we did this weekend next year in Chicago, how many of you would attend? Okay. So if we did this weekend next year in Los Angeles, how many of you would attend? Okay. All right. So just all right. Perfect. It's breakfast down the street. But just in terms of the New York-centric part of this conversation that we've been having is largely due to the focus and concentration of the community. And that doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it that New York should be the focus, but it is worth pointing out that the reason why all of us are here today is because it is convenient for many of us to be here. So if we're looking at location diversity, which is a great thing, and we definitely want to involve more of the country nationwide, I would love for each of you to consider your commitment to head out into the community. As we branch out, as the organization branches out into other areas, I would love for you guys to be willing to go there as well.
Good.
I just wanted to add to that. Being someone, I live in Austin, Texas, so in terms of theatrical geography, it's not on the way to any of those places you just mentioned. So in many ways, kind of out there on the frontier, representing as best I can sound design. And so the question of identity really interests me when I decided to come here. We talked about, like, what is a sound designer? And so in joining this organization, I feel very much like I found a lifeline that can help support me as I'm out there on the Wild West out there. But also, I guess the question I want to ask is there perhaps, and in the same way that this organization can help me out there, maybe there's ways I can reciprocate that. Absolutely. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't have an answer to the programmer question. I can't help you there, but like, I'm just wondering, maybe there's ways that I can, give back to that in some ways. I don't know.
Yes,
there
definitely is.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely on that. And, you can certainly be on committees through the go-tos and you can host things that way. But I think it'd be good if we could go around the country too. I'd love to come to Austin for something at some point. But what I was going to say before your comment, I was going to talk about, I was in the association, I still am in the Association of Sound Designers in the UK, and this was an issue because, most of the sound design stuff that has money happens in London, but there's a ton of sound designers all through the country, and they tried doing something. I don't know if John's not in here, but I think it was in either Birmingham or Manchester, and hardly anybody went. So what they've ended up doing is they will subsidize anybody that wants to come to London for the events. They pay their train fare. And I know we can't pay flights to LA or whatever, but I was thinking of that more for the minority or people from smaller theaters that can't afford to be a part of this organization, that if there's some way, if we know of people, that we could maybe subsidize that.
The sky's the limit in terms of the development and finance department. As time goes by, actually, the more things that we have, the more ideas we have that are concrete, that we can go to a funder and say, we want to sponsor people to fly here. That's a lot easier than going to someone and saying, hey, will you just give us some money, right? So as we develop, we're going to have to prioritize. We've got to get the website paid for. But then we're going to start making decisions, all of us, on what we're going to spend money on next and how we're going to move it. Is it education programs? Is it the video series? There's a lot of things, but each one of those things are really good, as Michael Bodine will tell you. To go to somebody and say that.
Yeah, and I also just stress to all of us to think about the in-kind donations that each of us can do. So I know there were in-kind donations this weekend of just housing for people that came out. That there were a couple of us that had that hosted people that came for this weekend. We don't have money to do flights, but we may have a aero bed. I kind of want to say thank you again to Zach from Autograph. So this was, this was something that Lou Mead and Zach figured out. That's our present from Autograph for this conference. And that's huge. Can I just tell you, he's done so many different things over the last 2 days. That was so huge. I can't even tell you how huge that was. But so gifts like that, things that we can do, assistance you need to keep on payroll, so you give them to help out on something. Like think about in-kind stuff.
Hey, well, first off, I walked here from Boston, so you're welcome. No. But I think we've spent a lot of time this weekend having really good conversations about how we address other people in the industry, be it directors, producers, audience members, and talk to them about sound, what we do as designers. But I think it's also important that we spend some time thinking about how we talk to I hate to use the word creative because it seems so biased, but yeah, thank you. People who work in sound, whether it's production sound, whether it's the regional supervisors, whether it's A2s or A1s, but also about how we do outreach to them about what this committee is about, possibly about how we can work together with them, but also about what expectations may be. There are issues that we've brought up about what happens when the Broadway sound designer goes to the regional theater and the asshole department head like me goes, well, this is how we do things here, so you're just going to have to deal with it. Like, there's a way of engaging to prevent that before happening. I think it's important that we as an organization spend some time thinking about how we talk to our fellow sound people who may not be sound designers.
It's interesting to say that because I had a conversation with Anna Lee Craig after the panel that I had with her, and one of the things she said to me was, she said, I really enjoyed this, and I really like this. The only problem is that I'm an A2, and I don't know how much use I am to this organization because I'm translating out of design. And it's the same thing that I said to Philip earlier when he was talking about whether he would be able to be helpful to us as an organization. And it's important, this organization was really founded on a specific idea that each of us, all of us in this room, are a resource for one another. And you don't have to know the answers to everything for you to be valuable to the collective with your information that you know. And Philip, you teaching in a small college, in Austin is as valuable for us as a resource in ways that we reach out to sound departments and organizations as it is for a sound supervisor in a regional theater, as it is for an A2 on Broadway. All of those people are important to our overall mission of being able to draw from the resources and hopefully illuminate and help us do this job better. So the word inclusion in this sense is really important because each of what you have to offer is valuable to us. And if you don't think it is, or if you think you're somehow less than someone else because of your experience, please come and approach any of us who have been working on this for a while, and we will all tell you how much we want you here. Because we need you. We need lots of different types of backgrounds in order for this to be really fully functional. So stick with us, is what I would like to say.
I have a non sequitur. Is this a good time for it?
I just wanted to say one more thing. It's not only that we want you to feel included, but you're talking about something specific that we didn't really get into today, and we really need to, which is communication. What are the responsibilities of sound designers to, someone in your position out there in the world? How much paperwork do we need to give you? How complete does it have to be? These are all really real concerns for you, because if you end up with nothing, you don't know what's going on, et cetera, et cetera. Some people are great at it, some people are bad at it. But one of the things that this organization, I believe, is going to do, and it may take a couple of years, is raise the bar for all of us. And I think I've said this before, but that those of us who are not good at paperwork are going to learn how to do paperwork from each other. Those of us who are not good about communicating and answering phone calls are going to learn, hey, this is something we really got to do. And if we're going to treat people right, and if we want people to be part of what's going on, we're all going to get better at what we do, and we're going to teach each other how we work with computers and make all that easier and make it better and interesting and learn about all these different things. But yeah, we got to treat you guys with respect. There's no doubt.
Along what you were talking about, I was thinking it would be very helpful if, with this new website, we were able to put a blurb about ourselves, things that we could offer the community, like what software we use, what sound effects libraries we're familiar with, what drafting programs we've got, where we live, so that we can look at, they work in Logic, and I've got this question. Let me email and say, do you know how to do this?
If you're people that have done the little profiles in the newsletter, like if you go to the website and you click on their name, you get that profile. So slowly over time, that was a thought for that kind of profile. But it sounds like this might be a different kind of profile, and I feel like it might need to be separate, right? Yeah, it's already in there. Okay. But two different kinds of profiles. Yeah, it's one profile. It's your profile. Yeah. But my everything that you are proficient in, I don't know, but we're just going to talk about it tonight.
So it will include everything that you're proficient in, and it'll have where you are, where you live, and then you can upload as well what shows you're on, where you are, so that people can network with you, and it's all there. Like like this event right now, there would be listing at the bottom of the event page who's actually here in the room right now. So everything is current as well. But Nick will go through that tonight. It's really exciting for the website stuff tonight.
I would just say though, just in talking about this, as we're thinking about this out loud, that it seems to me important, maybe each of us, when this task is assigned to us to make these profiles,
yes,
that we think about what we, like maybe as two kind of, I feel two separate statements. To the world, my dream for sound design, in the world is a different kind of language than I work in Ableton and I work off Broadway and whatever. Like, so Exactly. It feels like two different, and maybe it's all
Yep.
part of the same page,
Yep.
but that we like think about those as two separate things.
And the thing is that it will all be member generated. You will do your own profile. You will do your own postings.
You could do it as a stereo.
I'm waiting my turn. Something I would love for this association to be a venue for is career advancement. I can count on one finger all the jobs I know how I got, and I have no idea how to get more work. And the level of my career, for lack of a better term, feels rather like this, and I have no notion of how to advance. And my union can't help me, and if I had an agent, my agent can't help me. So maybe this organization can help me.
I think that's the nature of the community.
Yeah.
I mean, I saw you working Scott today.
Tried.
That's how it's done.
Sure. I feel like maybe there's something a little bit more systemic available to us than buttonholing a colleague.
Well, we've talked about mentorship programs for early career people, but we've also talked about having mentorship programs for mid-career people. And there's going to be opportunities that are given where I don't know that any of it's going to be a silver bullet to a bright and shining future, but I think there are going to be opportunities where you're going to be able to hit. All right. But there will be opportunities where you can learn more and do more, and that's going to happen.
That feeling never quite goes away, though. I mean,
Yeah.
just rest assured. Isn't the topic of this, though, what we want this organization to pursue? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, this is what I want.
And-
I agree.
Also on the education committee, there's the thought of that if we're going to these communities of directors and producers and critics and things, and we're educating these people, then those people will be more willing to reach out to us to look for people to work with. Kind of quid pro quo.
Just to circle back, Nick just chatted to say that it's all searchable by criteria.
Cool. And also from the Education Committee, we're planning some professional development workshops so you can get some new tools in your tool belt. So hopefully you'll be able to be part of that.
I mean, I'm a big fan of marketing, and I've used it in my career. I've used it other places. I've used it for this organization and elsewhere. I'm also happy to team up with people to talk about self-marketing as a possibility of how to expand things for yourselves.
Actually, we've talked about in the Education Committee having a way to train ourselves, because some of us, like Lindsay's got a gift for the gab. He's a huckster. He's good at it, and we're gonna take advantage of those skills because that's what he's really good at, and he's gonna teach the rest of us how do we talk to people, how do we get more jobs, or more specifically, how do we put forward what we're doing in this organization? How do we do talkbacks so that we're comfortable in them and make sense in them and things like that? And we can learn a lot. I mean, and we can teach each other quite a bit. And if we have information, we were talking about it earlier today.
I just keep thinking of things, but Association of Sound Designers in UK does this webinar series. I think it's a live thing, but they also beam it out, and but they video it and they keep it on their website in a members only section, and they're excellent videos. I look at it from time to time. So maybe we should do like a monthly, webinar or something.
All this is.
Okay.
It's demonstrating a webinar.
But I mean, okay, yeah. So maybe we should make that a point every time we do one of those that we make it doesn't have to be a 3-camera shoot, but just something to archive it and make it available to people that couldn't be there. Awesome.
They make it available to us. You said it's a members only thing. Do we take advantage of
We can always ask. Yeah. I mean, it might be something we could partner with them, and we share our content. They share theirs. They're great people.
They've been very supportive of us so far. So I mean, anything's possible.
Yeah, and I'm friends with them too, so I'm happy to talk to them if I need to.
Ken?
I have a non sequitur if we're. I think it's been brought up already, but I think the suggestion of creating a language, and maybe that means a dictionary or something that we can all refer to and have a language that we can communicate in, because I know I'm personally frustrated in it. I know that many of the people in the room are frustrated with having difficulty in communicating. And so maybe creating, like I say, a dictionary or something that gives us all a general reference point that we can therefore use the same language with the rest of the world and look more like a cohesive group, if you will.
For something like that, do you think it also might be like... It might be what USITT has failed to do, which is create a standard, like a paperwork standard? Paperwork standard.
Yeah, are you talking about within our community, or how we express ourselves outside our community?
Well, I guess I wasn't too worried about who would have access to it. I was more worried about the conversation that needs to occur to create that language. I mean, we seem to have a real lack of language in the English language to talk about what we do or what we perceive. So would love the idea of new language creation. If people have suggestions out there, let's develop new language, whatever that means. If that's literally new words, literally new vocabulary or whatever, and have some place where we can all reference it.
I actually think a lot of that vocabulary exists. What happens is it isn't coherently shared. And that's part of I think what you're getting at is the actual sharing of language. And also, I think it is discovery about language that more accurately represents an idea that isn't necessarily highly technical, that they can have so that it can be a conversation. And we have to have both levels. We need to have a deeper conversation amongst ourselves that is primarily technical, but we also have to have the ability to say something to a non-technical person, specifically other creatives who don't know the technology, so that we can talk coherently with them. And I actually do believe that much of that already exists, but we really have to kind of aggregate it if that's the case. But we also have to agree to adopt it if that's that. So that's a whole other problem.
I think he just volunteered.
Oh, I am the last person you want.
A different topic that I wanted to bring up. I think there's a few members. There's a lot of members of this organization that also balance very, I would say, at times very prolific academic careers. And I'd be interested to kind of hear a little bit from people who are teaching, how they're approaching their teaching. And I think that actually feeds into the conversation, into the question of a standardized vocabulary that is both technical and sort of outside language. But I think balancing academic careers and professional careers is a conversation I think could be had.
So just to clarify, you're interested in a session that talks about balancing a teaching career along with a professional career, or are you interested in I'm really curious about, or is it how we are teaching sound design?
I mean, I do think it's a combination of both. I think I mean, the short answer it's that. But it's not. I'm not talking about how you balance your hours or how you balancing this, but how you balance practice versus teaching. I know in my limited teaching experience, there's oftentimes do as I say, not as I do, right? Sort of approach. But also because a lot of people have come at it from very different directions, there's not yet a standardized way of teaching sound design. And there's, yeah. Well, and that's specifically what I'm talking about. There are people here who have dedicated some significant effort to do that. And I think that's a voice that could be, I would love to hear more.
Absolutely. No, and I didn't mean to be flip. David actually has done some work on a text that's incredibly helpful to Michael and I when we teach the first year people. What's it called again?
Which one?
The
Only
theater,
3 of them.
the theater sound, blah,
Yeah,
blah, blah. The one with Lebrecht.
Yeah, it's Sound and Music for the Theater. Yeah, edition 4.
Which, anyway, yeah, but you're right. We need to
And
get
that is only scratching the surface, that particular document. There's actually so much more. And that would be a pretty big endeavor in terms of throwing out ideas. And I'm actually prepared. I've got volumes of new language that I've created to define this business for the purposes of teaching specifically. Whether or not that's an agreeable language is yet another question. But that starting the conversation about looking at what kinds of vocabulary work, I think that's great. And then coherently we could look at, okay, what things seem to resonate, what things seem to land in such a way as to really convey an idea succinctly. And that can happen.
Yeah, and one thing we're talking about local versus national. I think this particular city presents a unique, there's a lot more people who are balancing, there's a mechanism in the city for people who are balancing full professional careers and full teaching. That is a little bit, I think, sometimes tougher for certain people outside of, and so a harder choice needs to be made for some people. So I think that's part of the conversation.
And one of the other things about it that we talked about, and different members have talked to me about this, it's not about splintering the group, but in his people that are specifically interested in it, we should make available time for them to do it. If there are people that want to talk specifically what you talk about, it doesn't mean that we all have to talk about everything every time. There's been people that talk about, they'd really like a group that's just Broadway designers to talk about, the regulars, the A-listers that, really want to talk about specific things that they just want to talk about with that group. And it doesn't mean that it has to get cliquey, or maybe it would, but I think there's a way for our organization also just to offer up a way to get super specific, especially as we grow. I could see this organization having 500 people in the next 3 years. And that's going to be hard to get 500 people all to want to talk about the same thing at the same time.
Really quickly about vocabulary, it's just because we want to create vocabulary, new vocabulary that we all use, it doesn't mean that we should start limiting ourselves for not using vocab words right now. So when you're talking to directors or you're doing talkbacks, or if you're in an interview somehow for a press release, don't be afraid to use the vocabulary that you use to describe your own work, because we will quickly latch onto it if we like the article, if we like certain vocab words, and that might be, a vocab word in a press release from 10 years ago is going to get combined with something that somebody may release tomorrow, and that might create something that is more easily used by the greater community.
Hey, I just wanted to jump back really quick to what you were talking about just a second ago about the organization and making available places for people to talk. And I think that's really great. And I'm just hoping that those places, those specific places where people can talk to like-minded people about things, are not closed off, so that it really doesn't turn into a cliquey thing, so that it is available for everyone to learn.
I think in a lot of instances there would be, but that'd be more like a seminar. But I mean, if there's a group of people that, if Alex and his group really want to talk specifically about what's going on with assistants and what their plan is, and a certain amount of discretion is necessary. I don't think it's something we would want to put out publicly.
What do you mean when you say closed off? What are your concerns?
Well, I mean, coming up in the past 8 years that I've been doing this, like, I couldn't find a way to contact other people. I couldn't figure that out. And part of it was it seemed very cliquey. And So this organization for me is a lot about meeting everybody and going, oh, great, everybody's here, let's talk, let's have that conversation. And if that immediately becomes like, these are the Broadway people, they're having their conversation, and these are the off-Broadway people, and they're having their conversation, that to me just goes back to where we kind of were. And I guess for those of us kind of down, looking up, or whatever you want to say, it would be less helpful.
And we will talk about this tonight. There will be a member directory where you will be able to contact anyone in this organization. Anybody. We're all able to contact one another. Now, as far as how you're going to interface with certain people, that is largely dependent upon the people. I know the people that we had today and yesterday who consistently work on Broadway, those people are very accessible, and I have a feeling if you contacted them, they would be happy to talk to you. There are other people I can think of that would perhaps be less accessible. But that's just endemic in their personality. So, but don't feel like that shouldn't feel like that's closing off to you. That's just how those people are. If that makes sense.
Totally, and I don't mean to say like everyone has to be available to everyone ever, but like this issue about we just keep coming back to your issue here. Okay, or an issue that I'm having way the hell downtown. Like if I only talk with my off group, which is 4 people, maybe that doesn't then propagate to the regionals, or that doesn't, and I don't learn from the Broadway community that there is this contract thing. So it's just it's not about being able to say, I can contact you at any moment in anything, and I don't need to necessarily know absolutely everything, but I would just hope that there would be an open communication.
Yeah. Bye, John Leonard. Thank you, John. Bye, John. As I'm always the one to say, in the bylaws. How it's set up is that even if there are separate conversations, they are under committees of different things. So that would fall under, I don't know, work practices or something, right? And then that information gets disseminated, has to go through the board, so that information then gets disseminated to all the membership. So it will hopefully never get to the point where it feels like cliquey and factions are splitting off from each other, that everybody is aware, and that anybody who wants to be involved can be involved, which is the most important thing, I think. It's up to you.
If you've got a burning issue where you need to talk to people about an answer, we have the TSDCA Facebook page where you can post that question, and I guarantee you someone will respond very quickly. Because that's what's happened so far. So you've got lots of resources available for that.
Yes to all of this, and also I think Ian's making an important point, which I want to make sure doesn't get glossed over in the interest of answering her direct question. And the bigger important point that I think that you're making is it's uncommon for a large organization to start. And here we are starting it, right? And now is the time where we produce an environment where it is kosher for Ian, who works off to be around for this discussion about splitting contracts on Broadway. Not because Ian is about to split her contracts on Broadway also, or in her little theater, but because we do not now know, nor could we know until after, how that conversation can inform her, help her career, and help all of sound design with big S and big D. And so if we take the effort right now to make sure that to minimize the siloing of conversations, to make it most easy, to make it deliberately approachable, that anyone feels welcome. Whether or not they are welcome is not what's important. Whether or not they feel welcome is what's important. No, I'm not. I'm serious though, right? Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, sure. Okay, fine. But if I'm welcome and you're all like looking the other way, then I don't feel welcome, But if I feel welcome, then I will be able to participate. Oh, see?
So welcome.
And I feel welcome, and Jim is here to make sure of that. Anyway, that's what I think is you're saying, and I think that's valuable.
I kind of, Sam and Toy both sort of addressed what I was kind of thinking, but I was just going to say it anyway. Personally, as somebody, I work almost exclusively in Boston, and a lot of that work is at, I don't know what I'd call, I guess, like off-regional or off-regional, okay? Right? And so just to piggyback on a couple of things different people have said over the last hour and a half or whatever it was, it is also, I am going to jump onto the bandwagon, throw my hat into the crowd that says it feels very important to me also that when talking even about, well, what classifications of levels of theater organization are we considering, even in saying, okay, where do we want to focus, et cetera, that classification also stay on the books as one of the ones that exists, I guess, right? That it's sort of, Broadway, off-Broadway, regional, and then off-regional, kind of a thing. To that point, I think the thing with the kind of committee discussions, I guess maybe the way that I was wondering about it is if it's sort of not falling into making an assumption about who might be interested in a discussion or another discussion. And part of that has to do with things, again, that I think, like Sam, you were just saying, that it's possible, like even the thing you were bringing up, Alex, while it doesn't directly affect me, I am very interested in those questions and organizationally and how might that work, both for the broader kind of community, which then ends up defining all of us in some way in terms of how the work is valued, how it's thought of, how it's categorized, but then also because it might be that tangentially a tactic, a negotiation, a conceptualization of something that applies there that's kind of developed might be something that I'm like, wow, when I talk to this person on some other random show that has nothing to do with that, that's actually a really interesting way to phrase that, to approach it, that then can help me get leverage for something I'm trying to do. So for all those reasons, I think it's really great to keep it open and transparent in that way, as you were all saying.
I'm sorry I said it.
All right, everyone say hi to Curtis Craig, Nick Keenan, Matt Otto, Dave Tostelaine.
Well, there's 6. I don't know who the other
Six. All these people are watching us right now. David Crawford, they're all watching us and listening to us right now, and it's not creepy. Hi, guys. And is all guys on? Yeah. That's it. Nothing important.
Even apropos to what Brad just said, but for what it's worth, and maybe this is just my way of being a little bit kumbaya about this. Oh well, okay then.
Hi, Justin.
But the conversation that you're a part of right now didn't happen 20 years ago at all. I mean, we would run into each other occasionally. David and I would run into each other occasionally, but a real shop talk organizational, well, what do you do about this, and how do you get your benefits exactly, and what about pension, and and what about equipment, and what happens over here? None of that happened 20 years ago. None. I mean, I think you and I were both invited into USA around the same time, right? And until then it was, well, maybe we'll get into the union war. I don't know. What are you going to do? Yeah, exactly. I mean, and it was so I really do think that just realize that everything we're talking about here in an organizational place was not happening at all, whether you were off Carlsbad or Broadway, and an intersection between all of it, and God knows an online contingent. Hello, boys. That did not happen 20 years ago at all in this profession. So I think that's what's been most encouraging to me, that there's a kind of an opening up of books and sharing information about all the hassles we all go through, sometimes it gets a little bit ugly too, because we're all trying to eke out a living in a world that 20 years ago, again, wasn't particularly interested in having us, except the work was good to have in our shows. So thanks for doing that great sound, and here's $10. You know, it's just interesting. So there you go.
I mean, I think one of the practical things about what you guys are saying is, and I would love to have that information be out there, and maybe this is, and unfortunately I can't be here for the meeting tonight, but maybe just from an organizational standpoint, being able to have things like meeting, notes from meetings, or what is the secretary takes the minutes, yeah, like having minutes available, because obviously it's what's going to happen is this group is going to generate huge amounts of information, and none of us are going to be able to funnel it all together. But I think if for people who do say, oh man, like when you go down like you're like a Google K-hole and you're just like, I need to find out about this. Like if you did decide that a G-hole. It was like a Radio Lab had a whole thing about it. Anyhow. But no, like if you do decide, like I want to find out about this, and I don't know from an organizational perspective how taxing that would be, but I think that having things like minutes available for people to look back on, or just outlines, even if they can't be directly involved in the conversation, I think is a very valid thing, because there are things that don't apply to me that I find very intriguing and interesting as well. So I think what you're saying is very valid. And that clickiness is going to separate us, but there is the concern over you can't have an 85-person conversation every time. So, anyhow.
We were speaking this morning, and what we have been developing with the website as well, and possibly with Basecamp, is having the committees each have their own tasks and have it be accessible by all members. So you can always click into every committee and see what they're doing, what needs to be done, what they're talking about, the chats that are going on, and all that information. Know when they're having meetings and when those meetings are taking place, if you want to join or not. So I think that's all part of our plan in order to keep this all transparent in a way.
So we have 3 minutes left. Jane?
Real quickly.
Oh, I thought you were signaling.
Oh. Just question for the website. Will members be able to search keywords on meeting minutes? Okay. But if for instance, in 10 years, I want to know about union membership benefits, can I type that in and then find a conversation that Alex started 10 years before? That's
one of the things that we've been finding, and we've done a lot of meetings recently, and there's a lot to be said. It's as if we expected, it's hard to expect someone, say for instance what we just did, to have taken meticulous notes that we could use as a search data. It'd be very difficult, but what we can do with the GoToMeeting is we can record each one, and we can put those online so that if you were interested in something, you could go and listen. But to ask anyone to even in our it's been hard. I mean, we do some rough outlines of what we talked about, but it's still, and like for me to do it, Ken, it takes me 2 weeks to get them done. I mean, it's hard for us. We're busy people. We talk a lot, blah, blah, blah. But, so I'm not sure it's reasonable to ask of ourselves that in particular. But maybe it is reasonable to ask that we have recordings that are available?
I think the committee threads will probably yield some of the answers that you're looking for. And I think that will most likely be searchable. So I don't think that'll be a huge issue. Plus, there will be human beings to talk to that can help point you.
No, you can't have everything. No, he said that it's you can search members only posts based on content. So yes, and then I asked if the secretary, as a member, posts the minutes. Can you do that? Is it searchable? So what he's looking at in these conversations coming up that we will be discussing the website is to see. Let's see how he puts it. How needs fit low-hanging feature fruit.
That's a big statement.
So, but yes, you can search. If Jane, as secretary and a member of it, puts it up on the website, you can then search it. So, yes. by keyword.
Anything else before we close? All right, thank you all very much. Well, a little break. 8 o'clock will be our meeting.
It's now dinner break? This is dinner break. Like, we filming dinner break?